Welcome to the webinar. I'm glad everybody can join us today for Fork the Bank, how open source is rewriting the rules of finance. My name is Tim Serewicz, VP of Education for the Linux Foundation, and I am joined by two amazing guests today. We have Rob Moffat and Hélène Astier, and I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves because I would just keep going on. But Rob, would you start us off with a quick introduction so everybody knows who you are?
Hi, Tim. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Rob Moffat. I'm the Chief Architect at FINOS, which is the Financial Open Source Foundation, part of the Linux Foundation. And my job is to help lots of the FINOS open source projects work towards achieving their goals and getting the most out of their technology.
Sounds good, Rob. Thanks very much. Helen, would you like to give us your quick introduction?
Sure. So my name is Hélène Astier. I'm the head of technology, EMA Enterprise Technology and Sustainability at S&P Global Market Intelligence. So market intelligence provides real-time data and analytics, news and research for multiple asset classes to our customers. And I specialize in streamlining departments like sales, customer service, tech, sometimes even HR, legal, with AI to make them more efficient by increasing automation.
Sounds great. That's a lot. So you keep busy. I can tell. I can imagine. Thank you for joining us today. I have a ton of questions. Everything in this space and fintech is very popular right now. So there's probably going to be lots of questions from our audience as well. Starting off, to give everybody a little bit of an understanding, Rob, you just wrote a book, if I recall, Risk First Software Development. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Tim. Thanks for bringing it up.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's just hot off the presses, not really off the presses. It's in digital format at the moment. What that means is that it's like in a sort of a beta format, so people can download it and read it and comment back and help me improve it. Just software has beta releases and things. So hopefully in a few months, it will go final release. But if anyone fancies getting involved in the beta program, I'd love to hear about it. Risk First is all about the risks involved in software development and creating a taxonomy of the problems we face as software developers and trying to look at ways to balance those out and manage them and the different practices that you can use to manage them.
Well, it sounds good, especially in this space. So is it applicable to the open source world?
Super applicable. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. At FINOS, I kind of work on maybe 3 or 4 initiatives. I spend sort of the lion's share of my time on 3 or 4 main things. And one of those things is a project called Open Source Readiness. And Open Source Readiness is really about, so as I said, FINOS is all about trying to help the finance industry get the most out of open source. So Open Source Readiness is all about how can they work with open source, make the most out of it, collaborate with open source, get the most out of foundations like the Linux Foundation and FINOS. What are the best practices in using open source, training their staff, involving with projects, pushing to repos, this kind of thing.
That makes
And
sense.
it turns out that the whole of open source readiness was like a risk management exercise. And we started breaking it down in terms of the risks that banks faced when they contribute to open source and looking at the ways in which they could manage those risks and the practices that they need to take on in order to deal with those risks successfully. So, yes, so the whole kind of risk first methodology approach was exactly what we used in open source readiness. And it's true in other projects as well, like in cloud controls. This is very like we're looking at security risk there for cloud deployments for financial services firms. As you can imagine, this is super critical to get right. There's lots of money at stake, customers' money, banks' money, government's money, who knows. So security risk is everything there. And we try and break this down into in a sort of methodical way, looking at the problem and breaking it down into different types of threats and the controls that you can use for those threats.
Sounds
So
good.
it's not, but seems to apply everywhere. Yeah.
Risk is everywhere. Security is everybody's job, for sure. FINOS in general. So we're going to talk about collaboration, especially with S&P Global. But what is the main purpose of FINOS?
I tell you what, I'll have a crack at answering this first, and then I'll hand over to Hélène for her view on this as well, because I think we probably have 2 different perspectives on this. My kind of dogmatic perspective on this is that, so I've spent a long time in my career working in finance, I live in Colchester, but I've worked in London for most of my career, working at various different financial organizations. All the banks cluster together in London. There's Canary Wharf and the City, and you can find all the different banking institutions there. So when you get a new job, you cross the street and go and work in the other firm over the road. And this is great, right? They're basically sharing talent very closely from one firm to another. But what they're not doing is sharing software from one firm to another in the same kind of way. And this always struck me as odd. It seems like you're going to share talent and ideas in close proximity like that and let everyone go to lunch with each other. Then really you should also be sharing your software as well and collaborating on software. And that is what FINOS is all about. It's all about trying to help banks to get the most out of open source as a way of collaborating together and sharing their best practices and tools and techniques. But let's hear from Hélène. What do you think it's all about?
Yeah, S&P works fairly closely with FINOS. And what we do is we do networking events together, like the one that you hosted about agentic AI in our headquarters recently in New York City. We also participate in conferences. So we had a couple topics in the last OSF conference, right? One topic was about FDC3 sub-agents for apps composition. And another topic was about one software that we open sourced for FINOS called CafeX, revolutionizing test automation in financial services. In the future, there's another conference coming up in October 21st and 22nd in New York City. And AJ Smith and myself are going to present a topic called Agent Assemble, a workforce of bots to boost your team productivity. We're very involved in the automating the SDLC these days with the AI. That's a topic that's close to our heart, and we're gonna explain how we leverage open source in parts to help do that. We work, like I said, closely on open sourcing some of our software. We have in-house an inner source program that provides a path to open source, and it's around creating like this community to be able to work together on a piece of software that is non-IP related to help us move faster. So there's a couple tools that we're working on. CafeX is one that we released recently. There's also one person in a company working on FD3 sub-agents. And then Wayne talks about other tools that we might open source in the future. And then one last thing is we work with you also on creating common controls for cloud, and then more recently for AI services, exchanging ideas to create like a framework to make more tools or tools a little bit more secure in this world of AI. Yeah.
Okay. The collaboration is key. And of course, we give a lot of stuff away with open source, and we typically get more back in return. So Helen, from your understanding of the open source interaction you've seen, what is the benefit? What have you seen benefiting coming back from being part of this open source world?
So it's really about fostering innovation, right? Like when you open source a piece of software, you get more eyes on it, you get more ideas, right? It's like having an extended team that works with you on that piece of software to make it stronger, to make it better. Collaboration has helped in that way. It also makes it a lot more secure because people come back and say, hey, you might want to look at this or you might want to look at that. And it's about giving more ideas and creating more features together to accelerate. Ultimately, it helps us go faster, and it also ultimately has an impact down the line on how we produce software for customers.
Great to hear. No, I like hearing that. Yeah, security is everybody's job, especially in the financial area. The old joke is, why do people rob banks? That's where the money is. You do have people trying to get at you, and it's good to hear there's such focus on security by folks and sharing that with others. This is probably a good time for our first poll question. So if we can have that first question come up. The question is, when it comes to open source in financial services, what matters most to you personally? So we have 4 options here: building career credibility and opportunities, gaining hands-on skills with real projects, expanding professional networks and collaborations, and then understanding how finance and open source intersect strategically. So we'll give our audience a couple, 5, 10 seconds to answer this. I'm interested eventually in seeing what those answers are. I know what I would select, but this isn't about me here. But financial services and open source isn't an area we would typically think these two things are going to come together. As I mentioned, people are very protective about their money. Here we see the responses, and let's take a look here. It looks like 44% they want to understand how finance and open source intersect strategically. And I'm a little surprised by that. What are your feeling on, Helen, what do you think about these responses? Is it about what you expected, that it was 44% for strategic view and then only...
Yes, absolutely. FINOS is finance focused, right? And I've been working in finance for a long time. So I'm not surprised that people in this forum want to know how finance and open source and intersect.
Okay. Thank you. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I think people are taking a sort of quite holistic view here, really. And selfishly, I think people also should be considering those career opportunities and credibility, right? Because what open source happens in public and it's there on GitHub for everyone to look at, or GitLab. And that's actually a really good calling card. It looks really good on your CV to have contributed to open source projects. When you're going for an interview from one firm to another, often, if all your work is happening behind the firewall, the only thing the employer has got to go on is what you put on your CV and credibility you manage to impress upon them in the interview itself. Whereas if you actually have some open source contributions behind you that you can point to, then that in a way is it's more proof. It's more proof that you know what you're doing and that you know what you're talking about than maybe just something written on your CV. So I think there's a lot to be said for using open source as a career tool as well.
I live in open source, so I couldn't agree more. And the Linux Foundation does have a pretty neat tool for seeing what you're contributing to in the open source world called LFX. But as far as the various projects that S&P Global and FINOS are working on, Helen, could you talk to us about some of the newer or soon to be released projects that you are working on with FINOS?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said earlier, we released something called CafeX recently. It is a testing automation framework that is specialized for finance. For example, you can get a lot of open source software to go and test your software. But this one in particular has a lot of like database comparisons, data warehouse comparisons. So it's very, very data oriented, and finance is a very data oriented field. There is also one person in our organization contributing to FDC3. And basically what it is, and Rob did absolutely add to it, is when you have multiple windows and, for example, a trader works out of a window and have a particular stock, it would update all the other windows that you have open to that particular stock, right? So they don't have to go back and forth and sometimes make mistakes. What that work is going to be about is basically updating on the same window multiple different modules. Yeah. Rob, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and fill in the gaps a bit there. Ellen's that's absolutely right. So FDC3 is one of FINOS's flagship projects, and it's widely deployed in lots of our member firms. Lots of big household names are using FDC3 behind the scenes to help orchestrate the user's desktop in the banks. So what I mean by that is, let's say we've all seen pictures of Wall Street trading floors and things where people have got monitors all over the place. They've got 6 different screens and they're shouting at each other and all this kind of stuff. High pressure, high speed environment. So what FDC3 does is it allows an orchestration between all those different panes of information on the trader's desktop. And it allows them to coordinate with each other. So if a trader's looking at one particular thing over here, all his other displays update to tell him what's going on. And that turns out to be really useful. One of the big problems in certainly some of the banks I've worked in is that you end up with this silo effect where different teams of people don't know what each other's doing. And this is what FDC3 aims to break down, is that there's this like common language that allows all these different teams to work together via the desktop. And so they can listen to what each other's publishing and looking at and update to show what's going on. And Ellen's right, there is a lot of innovation going on in this area at the moment. So we are trying to take FDC3 from being this tool that was really popular on the trader's desktop to being something that you can use just in the web browser. And you can have multiple different pieces of information in your web browser that update together. So like different web pages from different sources that update in synchronization. And we're also trying to get it to work from firm to firm as well. So if you can imagine a future where, let's say, one of Ellen's clients is looking at some data on their massive screen, and S&P Global is providing some data onto that screen, but maybe some of S&P Global's competitors are also providing data, and they're all able to interoperate together and collaborate to show that trader or that user, really doesn't have to be traders anymore, just show them what a combined view of all the information that they're interested in. So this is really exciting. There's lots of stuff going on in that area, and it's certainly a massive area of innovation, both for just FINOS generally, but also for the banks involved and the companies like S&P as well.
Okay. There was a question from our audience about, instead of new projects, why not join existing projects? You'd mentioned some new stuff and you mentioned different projects. Rob, what would you say, since you have a view from the Linux Foundation, what would you say is the reason you would or wouldn't start one of the new projects like what Helen had mentioned?
Okay, so that's really interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about open source generally, if I go onto NPM or Maven Central or PyPy or wherever you're downloading your open source from, there's just this absolute multitude of choices. There's all sorts of stuff that you can download from. And then within that sort of world, there's a subset of stuff there that is run within the Linux Foundation projects. And then within that subset, there's the FINOS projects. So we represent a very small subset of the whole open source ecosystem. And people, I think, tend to just collaborate on the projects that they urgently need to be improved. So they'll find something they find useful, but then there's a feature missing and they'll want to go and improve it. And so they'll go and work on those. But where it gets interesting is that financial firms have their own particular use cases and own particular issues. And so where S&P are contributing their own projects, it's because there's nothing in that ecosystem that really fits the bill for them. And they need to have something new and specific to their worldview and their use cases that they're looking at.
Oh, new and specific is always a good place to be. And that seems to be where open source often shines. Helen, you mentioned AI. And AI, of course, is a very hot topic right now. And how does that work in this space? It's all the regulatory issues and overhead, and then you add AI to it. And I do a lot with AI, and there's some hallucinations and other things out there. How does the advent of AI everywhere work in your experience, as you mentioned, working with AI and security?
Yeah. So in the context of CafeX, we're currently in the middle of adding new features with AI today. Hopefully it'll be coming up soon. But basically it will help automate your test cases automatically, right? The end-to-end, front-end, middleware, back-end. We're using AI just like everybody else is. And it's true that it's a field that's evolving really, really fast, right? So in terms of security, first, for any packages that we take from FINOS, right? Like we treat it as normal code, right? Like we have all our controls in-house to make sure that it's secure. And for everything that we give to FINOS, it's the same thing. We have all our security controls, and then you guys add your controls on top of that. AI is the same way, right? Like it's considered as code, and then we do the same checks from a security standpoint. Yeah.
And what would you say are the biggest misconceptions then? Because I have my own views of how AI does stuff. In your experience in your industry, what are the common misconceptions about AI and or open source and working with them?
I would say the biggest misconception with open source is that because it's open to everyone, it might not be as secure. People can put anything in it. And it's not the case at all. Actually, more experience putting code onto Finos, right? It goes through a lot of rigor and probably a lot more rigor than you think. We have internally multi-layer reviews. Like we go through an architecture review, we go through multiple security reviews at the division level, sometimes at the company level. We have a multitude of third-party scanners that we go through, like before we even release something. And then when Finos accepted, they have their own controls in place and their own checks in place as well. There's a lot of reviews. It's not like anybody can check in anything. So we are actually working on bolstering both security across. Yeah.
Great.
What do you think, Rob? Do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, Scott has just posted a link in the chat that people can take a look at for one of our projects, which is the AI governance framework. And I wanted to just take a quick sidebar on this because this is a really interesting piece of work, right? Because what it's doing is it's saying AI is a whole new area for everyone really, but for finance as well. And so because that's new and scary and presents new risks, going back to the risks we were talking about, we need to get together and work as an industry on defining what good looks like and how we deal with those risks. And so the AI governance framework basically breaks down the problem and it says, these are the threats that we face because when we deploy AI in our organization. If we have these threats, these are the controls we need to have to mitigate and manage those threats and hopefully minimize the risk that we face when we're deploying AI in our organization. So this is a really interesting cross-industry collaboration that Finos has helped pull together. And it does tie back into that sort of risk-first thing that I was talking about at the start. This very much speaks to that kind of risk-first way of thinking about software itself. And the idea of the AI governance framework is that financial services firms can take this work and then use it internally to inform their own security posture and their security controls and make sure that they can tick all the boxes and say, yeah, we're doing that. And that's really useful. They can prove that to auditors or regulators, make sure everyone knows that they're at least trying to do the right thing. So that's a pretty interesting project.
And to add to that, also, what's really interesting with the world of AI is it moves really, really fast, right? Like you said, there's new regulations coming up all the time, and so that's why having help across the industry to help bolsters those checks and then creating frameworks constantly around it really helps keeping up with the pace of innovation that's happening in the AI world.
That makes sense. This is probably a good time for our second poll question then, because you mentioned ticking the boxes in regulation. So our second poll question is, what do you see as the biggest challenge for adopting open source in highly regulated industries like finance? And the audience can put compliance and regulatory uncertainty, security concerns with external code, lack of internal skills or training, limited organizational buy-in from leadership, and then fragmentation or lack of common standards. And while we give a second for our audience to select one or more, there is a question about from the audience, do skills or certifications give companies or organizations the comfort they need to embark on open source fintech? Or is it a strategy to build just confidence in general? So how much is it skills to your staff? And we can talk about real world, but what's your feeling so far? Do you look for the skills? Do you look for just the posting to the repos? What is it? Well, we wait for what do you see here first?
That's a really tough poll question. I think you
Yeah.
throw people there because you're only allowed to pick one box. But I was just thinking I want to check at least 3 or 4 of these.
Yeah. And you can.
Yeah.
You could.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
you could.
Open source in finance is massive. I think we did some research on this, and like some ludicrously high percentage of all the code running in production is open source code. It's like in the 90% something kind of range. And the value of open source, there was a Harvard article recently that pegged it at about 9 trillion, I think, as being the value of the open source ecosystem for the world, which I have questions about that number, but it's a number nonetheless, and it's a big number. We should probably just take it. But yeah, this is exactly what we're trying to. This is what a lot of what we look at in the open source readiness project is trying to figure out answers to some of these questions. And one of the key ones you just said, it was training there. Certainly, the open source readiness special interest group at FINOS agreed with you that training was a huge concern. And we went on and ended up building like finance specific training around open source and a certification as well that I think we could put the link in the chat if anyone wants to look at this. Our finance training is free. It takes you through exactly what you need to know. If you're working in finance and you want to contribute and use open source projects, then it takes you through everything you have to know. And the idea of this was it's kind of compliance training. We should be giving this to staff who are involved in open source projects. And this was one of the ways in which the open source readiness special interest group thought this is a way we can advance like the maturity, the state of the art of the whole industry by providing good quality training that pretty much anyone can take for free.
Before we do the results, do you have any thoughts on that, Helen?
Yeah, no, I again, it's the same thing. Being able to get up-to-date training is key these days because I look at the news all day, right? AI is a full-time job. It's moving so fast. And so being able to harness like training that comes from open source is really valuable, right? They keep it up to date, and they try to create those frameworks that are common that everybody can use, but make sure that it stays current with what's happening.
That makes sense. And towards that, we got the results now for the poll question. And if you can see it, I'll read it to you. But the compliance and uncertainty was 61% of the folks said that. Security concerns with external code, 61%. Lack of internal skills and training was 22%, which as a training person, I'm surprised by that. Limited organizational buy-in from leadership, 43%. And then fragmentation or lack of common standards, 35%. I'm a little surprised by that. The security concerns, I was probably the only one I expected to see is fairly high. But Helen, from what I've said, this is your space as far as working with code and open source and some of those concerns. Is that about what you expected to see from the audience, or is this a surprise to you?
Yeah, no, that's what we addressed earlier, right? Like with the common misconceptions, right? So there's a lot of security concerns, and the bottom line is when you accept something, you got to treat it as your own, right? You got to make sure that it goes through all your own security reviews and your own standards. But from what I've seen, putting out software ourselves as an organization and S&P collaboration with FINOS, we've been very, very diligent, trying to do what we could to make it very, very secure. Yeah,
makes sense. And Rob, would you say? I mean, you touched on this just a second ago, but would you say that those results are a surprise or what you expected?
Yeah, I agree with you, Tim. I think I'd have thought training would be higher up there, but maybe it's low because you and I have nailed it. And we've got great training product. Everyone can just use.
I like that answer. I don't think it's accurate, but I like that the answer. Again, I work in skills and education. And Helen, you mentioned AI a second ago. You mentioned automation and doing pretty large projects in that space. What skills would you look for when building your tech teams in finance?
Really, what I look for in general to build my tech team in finance is first you got to understand finance. You you got to know your customers, right, and have a passion to make sure that you build good products for your customer. And then these days we have some extra skills, right? A focus on innovation, get into AI and keep up with the innovation that's happening in the space. And then we say data is the new gold. In the world of AI, it's really the case, right? Like you can see there's a big focus on data and we AI ready data, right? Make sure that your data is clean so that your models that are trained come back with the right answers. And so I particularly look for those skills in general to build my teams. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's the well, not Achilles heel, but you have to have good data to start with for AI to help you. If you synthetic data has been kind of a concern about that because how dependable is it? So, Rob, you've seen a lot of this industry as well for career credibility. So, if I want to get my next job, would you say that it's mostly showing a portfolio of open source contributions? Would you say, I would say, of course, it's anything from the Linux Foundation, but what would you say you've seen is the way to a job or a better job in this space?
I think, I mean, Hélène's got some of the answer there. I think I would say as well, like knowing your subject area is still absolutely key. Mastery of the tools that you're using is absolutely vital. And stay like even if you look outside of AI, just staying on top of the innovation and learning about what's happening in your space is incredibly important. So we're not paid to carry on building the same systems that were built 20 years ago. We have to update and modernize. There's the crypto industry, there's fintech, there's all sorts of regulatory change coming along. The technology landscape, even before AI, technology landscape was evolving at a ridiculous clip. And that's not slowing down. You have to stay on top of all of these trends and new technologies, basically.
And I would like to add to that a little bit. So when I think about people working on inner source projects, right, and what skills they need to have, first they need to be curious, right? They need to understand all the offerings that are available and what they can contribute to, right? They also need to have a passion of building together, right? Giving feedback, receiving feedback, and really a collaboration mindset, right? And like when you think about AI, we can definitely use AI to accelerate, right? Contributing to open source, for example, something that we need in when building open source project is a lot of documentation, right? AI is really good at building documentation, right? At least first drafts that you can review, right? And you'll see in the future, there's going to be more and more code built via AI, right? That developers will be able to review. So when you contribute, those systems now are getting in place to help the overall contributions.
That makes sense. Oh, yeah. And AI, I think, is not going away. It's not a fad. We're going to be using it for a while now. We've been talking about open source a lot, of course. And I have a question I'd love for both of you to talk to is we talk about open source and I would say, okay, what does that mean? How do I get started? What's an example a concrete example where open source really helped? It was a change, whether it's for the whole industry or a particular thing at your organization. What's something that you could say, here's where open source helped us directly? It wasn't just an idea and an approach, but it helped in this way. So Rob, why don't you kick off, if you have one, a way that it really helped using open source?
Oh, great. Okay, I'm going to give you two examples, I think. The first one, really going back to the start of my career, was using Java for the first time and realizing that people were starting to publish open source libraries and that pretty much anything that you wanted to do, there would start to be open source libraries for it. And I think early on, it was things like web servers and testing frameworks and things like this. And those are a great help when you're first starting out. Instead of having to walk the whole distance yourself, you have these tools that will just get you most of the way. And so that's like an early industrial example. And that's as true today as it was 20 or so years ago when I was first getting involved in this. But more recently, I've been using this tool called Joplin, which is an open source like note-taking tool. I don't know if you've heard of Evernote. It's kind of like Evernote, right? But Evernote's like a paid tool, and this is like a free open source tool. And I remember starting to use this and realizing I couldn't import some of my old Evernote stuff into it. And I thought, okay, it is an open source tool, and it's just missing this one thing I really want to import that I use all the time. And so I actually just wrote a patch to the project and had that patch merged, and then was able to import all my old Evernote documents into Joplin as a result of that. And I can't imagine that if Joplin had been a commercial product, that would have been as easy and as fluid as that. It's somebody needing a change, spending a couple of hours changing something quite trivial, like a small bug in the code, and like getting it fixed, and then making their own life better, but then also the other users of the software. And so that was just a really nice sort of example of where you can give back to open source and do something useful that helps a wider project.
That makes sense. Helen, what's been your journey with open source?
So I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently, right? I'm going to talk about CafeX and how we open sourced it for the FINOS community. CafeX is, as I said earlier, like a testing framework done for finance, and it helps do a lot of data comparison, right? Like between SQL, NoSQL. It really focuses on data. And our open source journey was first, right? Like we had to decide to open source it, right? Why would we want to open source it? And we want to open source it because we want more eyes on it. We want people to contribute, right? And, at that point, it was an internal project that we needed to fill one of our needs. So what we had to do is we had to remove the IP, right? Anything that was proprietary, we had to remove some of the business rules we had. We had to go through architecture review, through a legal review. We also had to go through multiple security checks, right? And then we also packaged it differently, right? And internally, when we deployed the internal version of CafeX, it used to be one package that everybody installed across. But we had here, we give the opportunities to package it if you want only the UI module, the middleware module, or the backend module. So again, contributing to open source was a little bit of a journey, but ultimately the benefits we get from it are really good, right? Like we get more eyes from the community. And then we learned that working with FINOS was about people. We spent a lot of time with the FINOS team for them to understand the project, to give us feedback on it. We also created a lot of documentation for people to be able to use it. Going through that journey was really, really interesting. Like I said earlier, in-house, we have an inner source program, which means that anybody in the company, which is a pretty big company, right, can contribute to inner source. And then we have several people that are dedicated to looking at these inner source projects. And we're creating a path to open sourcing. So Cafe was the first one. And I'm sure it'll become easier and easier over time to create that collaboration.
That's great. No, absolutely. And looking forward to seeing more on that. The collaboration has been a key word here. That's what open source is really all about. With that cross-industry collaboration, we like that as well. Finance, other industries. With that in mind, and we've talked about the different ways. Helen, earlier you mentioned the SDLC, which is Software Development Lifecycle. And I know that you've been around the world talking about quality in software. So how does open source and the SDLC fit together with quality in mind? Some people would say open source, there's nobody paying attention to it. Maybe quality isn't as high because anybody can do it. How would you phrase that? How would you respond to that accusation?
I would say, so first, there's a lot of protocols that are happening in the in the industry right now, like I'm thinking about MCP or A2A protocols that are all open source that are becoming mainstream and that are really cutting edge. So I do believe that there's a lot of how do you call it, activity, right, in open source in the area of AI. And when you think about quality, again, when we open source a project, we go through all quality checks, right? And then we open it to the community. And often what you see in open source, a lot of contributions for fixing bugs, right? Because it's a quick turnaround, right? People sometimes like they see a bug, they don't like it, and they're like, I can fix that. And then they go and they make their contribution and they fix those bugs. Open source in general is a good forum to actually create this culture of making sure that we create quality and we build quality within.
Makes sense. That makes sense. And Rob, you earlier mentioned a couple of things that you were working with. I think you mentioned the common domain model was one of those things. What does that mean? Can you walk us through that and what it does for us?
Absolutely. Yeah. This is a super exciting FINOS project. In terms of poll questions about where we might be in 5 years' time, this would be high up on my list of things to consider, right? So obviously I talked a bit before about the interoperability and having different information sources for the client on their desktop. But behind the scenes, all of these different financial services firms need to be able to send data to one another. And they need to be able to say, I'm buying this off you. You're buying this off me. I agree we've bought it. Here's your receipt. Thank you. There's the thing. All of these kind of transactions are happening usually incredibly quickly. We've all heard the stories about like microsecond trading and all this kind of stuff, front running deals and what have you. But the idea of the common domain model is that previously, all of the different banks were talking their own language. They all had their own protocols and they had to translate between them from one language to another, from one format to another. And the idea of the CDM is to do away with all that and say, listen, there's enough of this. Let's have a proper standard and let's standardize the whole thing. And this is not something that hasn't been tried before. There's been attempts like FIX and FPML that have tried to standardize financial data being transferred around. But the CDM is like a rethinking of this whole idea, and it componentizes and it allows you to build financial models out of like building blocks. So it's a really clever change of approach from what's come before. And we have a course on it. So if you go to that link that Scott posted above with all of our training in it, there is a training course on the CDM and it explains exactly how all this works. But it's one of those sort of universe brain moments where you just look at it and you think, oh, this is really clever. I like what they're doing here. So if we can end up with a proper industry domain model that's used everywhere in every single organization, this is going to make a massive difference to the work that Hélène and I and all the other programmers working in the finance industry have to do. A lot of that time was spent converting from one data format to another, whether internal data or external data. A lot of the time was spent preparing different regulatory reports for different regulators and auditors and things like this. But all of that goes away. Everything can be done in a common format. So it could be hugely transformational. And we're starting to see companies picking up on it now. And it's the beginnings of a sort of a movement towards this. It's really exciting to see it happen. Some of the big FINOS members are picking it up, but also we're seeing lots of interest from like blockchain companies, and all these sort of DeFi kind of initiatives are starting to express their contracts in CDM language, which is not a use case that we really thought about, but it's awesome to see that happening.
That is. Well, one wants to see all the hard work go everywhere. You actually kind of gave away our third poll question. So we can pop up.
Sorry.
Our third poll question. No worries. So the poll question is, where do you think open source will create the biggest impact in finance over the next 3 to 5 years? We see interoperability standards, for example, CDM, AI, ML tooling, and frameworks, security and compliance, data models and analytics platforms, and workforce development and talent strategy. In this case, it's a single choice of those. They'll give people 30 seconds or so to select it, and we'll talk about that. We have about 10 minutes left. Let's talk about what the future might be, and let's see the results to the poll question to give folks a chance to click on it. Of the people that have responded, we see, it's about what I thought too. Standards is the future, biggest impact, tooling, AI. Security I thought would be higher, but data models and workforce development, talent strategy. Gosh, I hope that would be the place. Of course, I'm in education, but I'm not in this industry. So I have a question for both of you. So Helen, if you'd start us off with, what do you think will be the biggest open source opportunities in finance the next 3 to 5 years and so forth? Like where do I keep busy?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think there's going to be a lot of standards happening around AI, a lot more innovation, a lot more projects contributing to AI and those AI frameworks. A lot of tools coming up also using AI, right? That I'm hoping to see in the future. I think, as we touched on earlier, data is also very important. I was surprised to see that data didn't register that high on the question. I would think that data, like data testing tools like Cafe or others, are going to come up to make sure that the data that we have is AI ready. Because if your data is wrong, you're going to run into trouble. And then I would think training, right? It's like a lot of training coming up specifically around the AI, up-to-date training that happens all the time. They get refreshed, I think would be very, very valuable to have in the future.
Okay, thanks. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a pattern, right, where like some commercial company or some like innovative startup will have an idea and start doing a thing and sell you some new software, and it maybe hopefully change the world. And then at some later point, someone will come along and make an open source version of it. And I think if you think about AI, we're already starting to see that happening, right? So ChatGPT came along and it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And the biggest software uptake ever in terms of like product launch. It was the fastest to get to 100 million users ever. But now we're starting to see, and this was started by DeepSeek really, we're starting to see open source AI coming along. So I think, like Hélène, I'm expecting to see where commercial startups have gone, open source will follow, and we'll see lots more tooling in those kind of areas. I'm actually interested to see if Hélène's got an idea of where this is going to go, because at the moment, what I see is that the companies like OpenAI release their like ChatGPT 5 or whatever, but and then they produce open source versions of their older models. I'm interested to see whether Hélène thinks that will continue or whether that's just a phase or whether something new will happen in the future.
I think AI is here to stay. And I think the thing with AI is that in the future, you'll be able to code and document much, much, much faster, right? So I think there's going to be, at least for a while, right? Like more and more tools coming out, more and more people are accelerating, right? And the output of projects that are going to get done is probably going to be much, much, much faster, right? Right now in-house, I've told you, we're automating the SDLC. We're going to do a conference topic on this and the next SSS, but we're using AI to build those AI tools as well, right? So you see how things can build on each other and it can move very, very fast. And when you harness on top of that, like the power of the community and a lot of really excited people who are passionate about the technology, building fast together, it can be a real tidal wave.
That makes sense. The tidal wave, we like that, especially if we're on the good side of it, riding it, instead of getting crushed by it. I do wonder myself, though, in AI in general, not any industry, if everybody has an AI and they have older models, is it going to be that I don't need a new one, that it's good enough, and that if it's free and good enough, that I don't need to go to anybody that's spending $100 million to train their model? Will that ever happen, do you think?
I mean, you already see some of the older models are getting retired, right? And people are eager to wait the next one, the next one, the next one. I think right now we're at the beginnings of it, right? I think just like everything else, so some of those models are expensive. And so people waiting to adopt them because there's just like everything, right? It costs compute time, it costs electricity. And I think right now people are very excited to get on the latest and the greatest, but is that going to continue? I think eventually there's probably going to be a point where maybe what we have is good and wait a little longer to get on the newer models. I think the newer models eventually become the older models because they leapfrog each other. We'll see where that goes. But I think right now there's a lot of excitement in the industry. I'm very passionate about AI. I want to see where it goes and how fast we go as a group of engineers. And I'm very optimistic about the future.
Awesome. Me too. Absolutely. We only have 2 minutes left, less than that, really. So if I gave each of you 30 seconds to say the one thing you wish people remembered, if nothing else, what would it be? So I'm going to throw it at you first, Rob. In 30 seconds, what's the one thing you wish everybody knew about this space that they don't?
Okay, there are lots and lots of links in the chat. So please take a look at those links, especially some of the projects like the AI governance framework, open source readiness, common cloud controls, and check out the OSFF conference, Open Source in Finance Forum conference in October 21st, 22nd. And take a look at my book. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Ellen, how about you? What if you could say anything in 30 seconds, what would it be about?
Yeah, so if I had to summarize, right, like what I would like to see is more and more people contributing to open source, right? I think when we put people together, that's when the magic happens. I think right now there's a lot of really excited people about AI and see what we can contribute to AI and use and create with AI. I think open source is going to benefit from this drastically with faster documentation, faster coding. And I can't wait to see what people will be contributing in the future. So I would really encourage the people on this call to really consider contributing to AI and to open source and spread the word, right? Talk to people, talk to friends, talk to people who are passionate, and we will see where this goes.
Sounds good. Well, thank you both for being here today. We appreciate it. Thank you to the audience for listening and on this journey of forking the bank. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Cheers, Tim. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our speakers for their time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. Just a quick reminder that this recording will be on the Linux Foundation's YouTube page later today. We hope you join us for future webinars. Have a wonderful day.